Mr. LaHood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of you for being here all morning and for your commitment and dedication to the intelligence community and your service. I also want to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Nunes as it related to Michael Ellis and the inquiry and questions that he raised. I think it warrants answers, and I hope that can be accomplished. I want to follow up on Mr. Stewart's questions as it related to the federal vaccine mandate. And maybe, Director Burns, I'll start with you. Is the agency prepared to terminate hundreds, if not thousands, of CIA employees, case officers, and intelligence professionals if the vaccine is not abided by?
Well, Congressman, I guess I'd say several things. First, we're fortunate to have about a 97% vaccination rate for our career officers, so it's a very high proportion of officers who've been vaccinated. Second, we follow the law. We're operating with a federal mandate here, which makes a term and condition of employment, not just at CIA, but across the federal government, to be vaccinated. There are, as Director Haynes mentioned before, and as you know very well, both medical and religious waiver possibilities, and we have a number, I think it's around 250 sort of pending religious waiver applications and a number of medical waiver applications as well, which we take very, very seriously.
And it's, but also the mandate, as I understand it, affects contractors and subcontractors and people that you work with throughout the IC community, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I know you mentioned 97%, but if there are hundreds that you would have to terminate, you're going to follow the law, as you just indicated, and terminate them at the appropriate time, correct?
We'll follow the process that's been laid out under the law, but potentially it could come to that, yes, sir.
So, and is it fair to say that that termination of those hundreds of people, or whatever the number is, would have irreparable harm or would have a devastating effect on the agency and your mission? Is that fair to say?
No, sir. I think we're going to be able to continue to fulfill our mission just as, the American people expect, and with a very high vaccination rate. We take very seriously those officers who apply for those kind of waivers, as I said, but I'm confident that we'll be able to continue to fulfill our mission very effectively.
And just walk me through the process. If I understand it, November 22nd is the date that the vaccine, that they have to have the information in, and then there's a suspension period, and then the termination begins. How does it work with the agency when you have assets and professionals all around the globe? When they don't do that, how do you bring them back? How does that termination process work?
Well, I'd be glad to describe the process more in more detail, but there is a process that's laid out across the federal government that we'll follow. But as I said, given the very high vaccination rate across the agency, I don't anticipate that there's going to be a lot of these cases that we have to sort through. But we'll take it very seriously, and we'll give every officer who's involved in that process every opportunity to pursue alternatives.
And in terms of, I do think there are, as you look at the legal issues here and the constitutional issues on the mandate, obviously this was not a law that was passed, this was an executive order. There are multiple cases pending in the circuit courts right now that I believe will be consolidated, eventually go to the Supreme Court. Would it make sense to ask for a delay until the U.S. Supreme Court decides on this? Clearly it's going to end up there. The last executive order the Biden administration did on the mandate as it related to housing and evictions wound up there. Would it make sense to ask for a delay so you don't have to go through this process of, throughout the IC, of terminating employees?
The only thing I could comment on, Congressman, from the perspective of CIA is just simply to say we're going to follow the law and the processes that are laid out in the federal government. And
have you asked the White House to ask for a delay until the Supreme Court makes a decision on the definitive legal issues here?
No, sir, but that's, my role, as I said, as is the role of all of my colleagues here on the panel, is to follow the law and follow the procedures that are laid out, and that's what we're doing.
But I assume it's not in your interest to terminate long-term employees of your agency.
No, it's in our interest to try to retain every employee, every career officer that we can, but we have an obligation to follow the law. We have an obligation to protect the safety and the health of our employees as well.
Understand that completely. I guess what I'm saying is, it would seem to me, none of you want to go through this process of terminating employers, contractors, subcontractors. That's going to come here pretty quickly in the next month. It seems to me there's a way out of this. This is going to end up in the Supreme Court, asking for a delay, working with the White House to have that done so we don't have to deal with this issue. And we're not talking about, I think the IC is different, right, than employees at the Department of Agriculture. This is a national security issue. This is an issue that affects all of you and us globally. And I think thinking about a delay or an exemption for the IC until the U.S. Supreme Court decides on this makes a lot of sense. I yield back.